In Chicago, you know that all sports rock. The Bears, Hawks, Bulls, Cubs, and Sox. Pick your favorite, you can choose. As long as the Packers lose. For everything you need to know, it's Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. This is your hosts Alex and Sean, and we are just going to jump right in today because this is what we call an emergency podcast. Because, bum bum bum, the Chicago Bears have hired Ben Johnson, former offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions, and hottest name in the coaching circuit, and he is now the head coach of the Chicago Bears.
They did it. They didn't screw it up. We were waiting for them to screw this up. And even though there were so many signs pointing to Ben Johnson being the favorites to land in Chicago, what did everybody sit here and do? They expected them to screw it up because that is what they traditionally do. They put on their big boy pants. They saw the faults in their ways and they aimed to correct it, and they swung for the fences.
And I don't know how much to take this as fact or with a grain of salt, but to Bears blog, who at some point definitely had a mole in Hallis Hall, but seemingly since Sweaty Teddy is gone, that mole has seemed to dry up quite a bit. But from what he is saying, that the Bears or Ben Johnson was comfortable with Ryan Poles as the GM, but wanted assurances from Kevin Warren and George McCaskey that they weren't going to meddle, and he got it.
Yeah, and look, they had this process together, and the process was casting a wide net. But it still seems obvious to me that even though they did their due diligence, and I do think that, as I mentioned on the previous episode, I have my criticisms, I have my gripes with Kevin Warren, but I feel like doing due diligence is part of his work ethic. And I think that's one of the good things that he brings. Because when you think about it, you can look at the past, what the Bears have done when they have narrowed their search. I mean, they did it in the last coaching cycle. They've had plenty of instances where people have asked, why didn't you talk to him? Why didn't you interview this guy? They want to do their due diligence, but Ben Johnson had to be their number one guy for a while now. And I can also say this too, that if you look at how this process all played out, I think that everybody expected the Lions to be in the playoffs much longer than they were. And the fact that they had all these interviews lined up for these weeks, and you're thinking, okay, you brought some people in, you've talked to guys mostly on Zoom, you've interviewed a lot of candidates, then suddenly, boom, the hottest coordinator is available. And it's like, okay, let's do Eddie George, Rooney Rule, and let's get this guy in here and let's get this done. Boom, like that. And they said, once the Lions were out, this was going to move quick. And it did. It's Monday and we get the news. And tomorrow he's going to fly to Hallis Hall and he's going to sign that contract.
Yeah. I mean, it did happen fast. I was expecting it to be fast, but I was expecting more like Thursday. And the Lions, were out and he didn't even last the weekend. So it's a little bit of shock. I mean, clearly the Bears identified him as the guy because everything else was just complete smokescreen. And I don't understand I, in some ways, like draft picks and things, yeah, smokescreen good because you don't want somebody to snake the player you want. But they knew other teams wanted Ben Johnson. You don't have to be secretive about it. It's it's not like, oh, well, the Bears want him. Like they make public who they interview. People know. Um, there's like you could easily say with these new rules, like, oh yeah, we did all our interviews. Now we're just waiting to bring in a couple people that are still in the playoffs. Um, so I don't know, but it's a happy surprise.
It is. And you know what is really funny too? Today, the smoke started getting thicker. And I was at work today. It was one of those things where, okay, I'm really busy in the morning. I'm not looking at social media. It's lunchtime around noon. I'm, opening my phone during lunch, seeing what's going on, and I kind of start to see a few rumblings like, oh, it seems like the Bears are hyper focused on Ben Johnson. There is a report that Ben Johnson has eyes set on the Bears. And then all of a sudden, we get the plane tracker. Did you hear about the plane tracker?
I saw something about it, but I didn't like I wasn't on social media much today, so I didn't see like details about it. I just saw that there was a plane tracker and I was like, uh-oh.
We've been through that before. Remember the Shohei Ohtani stuff?
Yep.
And basically, it was a plane going from Michigan to Chicago Executive Airport, and it was reportedly the same plane number that flew in Mike McCarthy, suggesting that it was indeed the Bears' private jet. And people were actually going to Chicago International Executive Airport and waiting to see Ben Johnson. And as people are going there, Tom Pelissero starts tweeting about the news that the Bears are finalizing a deal with Ben Johnson. So it was just such a funny saga, but it all came together so quickly. And I think one of the most surprising things about this, for just process standpoint, is there was no in-person interview with Ben Johnson. It was one Zoom call and boom, he's going to be the next head coach. So he's going to be coming to Hallis Hall for the first time to sign a contract, not for an in-person interview, to sign the deal.
Ron Rivera's like, what the hell, guys? What the hell?
Because how many in-person interviews were there at Hallis Hall?
Three.
So you brought in Mike McCarthy. You had
Four.
Ron
Sorry, there's four.
Rivera,
Thomas Brown
Thomas Brown,
and
obviously,
Eddie George.
and Eddie George. So
And,
yeah,
and and we reiterated on the show that the Eddie George one, just out of the blue, a guy that was on nobody's radar, did not do an interview, any cycle for anybody, and clearly they had him on the speed dial for. I wonder if this is one of those things that like Eddie George knew the wink nod what this was, and he's like, well, you know what? I get to fly out and get a free meal and get my name on the radar for coaching. Um, and knowing I'm not getting this and I'm just fulfilling the Rooney rule.
they fly him out. They bring him to Hallis Hall. They bring him to the cafeteria where they have cold sandwiches and wraps, and they say, "So how you doing? What's your favorite color? What's your favorite thing to eat on Thanksgiving?" Okay, thanks. Bye.
There's like, here's your meal, and it's just like a box lunch with a half sandwich on dry bread, an oatmeal raisin cookie in an envelope, uh and a bag of generic chips and an apple.
The apple's half rotten.
It's one of those like tiny little apples, and it's got brown spots all over it. They've
It
had
was
they've had it there since when they were interviewing Shane Waldron.
Yeah, it's just freaking sitting like it rolled under the counter. And they found it. Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, like I said, the Bears had to be expecting, as did most people, that the Lions would possibly be playing into February. And when that didn't happen, it was like, oh, well, then now we can move on this quite quickly. And they did. So you got to wonder this, and this was my theory on the last show. This is the theory I stick with. To me, it feels like Ben Johnson, plan A, Mike McCarthy, plan B. Do you get that sense? Because that's the sense I kind of get.
Um, I'm not refuting it. I That's very likely. I wonder if Munkin was calculated in there, or if he was a smokescreen because he was expected to go deep in the playoffs as well, and masking, the Ben Johnson interest.
Yeah, that might have been plan C, maybe. Because I mean, the way I see it is, and again, I'm just guessing here. This could be completely off base, but it's like, okay, if you don't get Ben Johnson, the number one candidate on their radar, it's like, okay, you have Mike McCarthy, Super Bowl winner, experienced. You know he's going to be a leader in that locker room. So it's kind of one of those, okay, if you can't get the hot young commodity, get the guy with the best resume. Again, I could be wrong. That's just my guess. But I mean, I don't think the Bears would have been requesting an interview with him when he was still with the Cowboys. And then after that, still bringing him in for an in person interview and dinner if they weren't somewhat serious about him being a candidate. Because I don't think you'll convince me at this point that Ben Johnson wasn't their number one guy, but they knew they had to have a fallback, right?
Oh yeah, they had to have a fallback.
But within all this, the Bears did something they've never done before, at least not in my lifetime. You hired just, even if this doesn't necessarily work out, because it's possible, he's never been a head coach before, but like this was the home run hire of this coaching hiring period. The home run guy. And the Bears got the home run guy. They swung for the fences and they hit it. I mean, it's the exact opposite of what they did 3 years ago. Matt Eberflus, half the people didn't know who the hell he was. They
They
had,
did not.
I mean, it's like, then you can look, it's like, okay, he coordinated some really good defenses in Indianapolis, cool, but what else besides that makes him qualified? It kind of felt like it's we're going to look so smart if we pull this off. And he's able to be a great head coach. And nobody knew about this guy. Look at us. There's none of that here. There's none of that. And we talked about the other coaching hires of the past in the last show. Yes, David Wannstedt was a hot commodity, right? Like you can speak for
Very
that.
much so. Yes, he
Yes.
was.
But what was he? He was a defensive guy, right? From
Yes.
the Cowboys.
Yes.
So, yes, he was the hot guy, but it wasn't the same circumstances. You didn't have a quarterback with the ceiling of Caleb Williams, and you weren't going for the hot offensive coordinator. You were going for the defensive coordinator, who was part of, a very huge historical run with the Dallas Cowboys. It's just a little different the way the circumstances were. But after that, and again, I was too young. You could speak to this. I don't know how hot Dick Duran was, but could you tell me Dick
No.
Duran was as hot as Ben Johnson?
Dick Duran was not very hot.
No. Lovie Smith, the hire worked. Like, that was a good hire, but was there as much hype around Lovie Smith as Ben Johnson?
No, but the going back to what we talked about with being from the tree, but the association with Tony Dungy was uh was important. So I don't think he wasn't not hot and exciting, but there was nothing like this.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. But then you go to Mark Trestman. Over the reigning coach of the year.
Yeah, that was nobody was happy.
Nobody was happy. And you know, some people might have tried to, including myself, tried to cope a little bit and say, well, it's thinking outside the box. It is an offensive minded guy, but considering you could have had Bruce Arians and this was a guy from the Canadian Football League, yeah. So you kind of shook your head there, especially with the way the results happened. John Fox made the hire look better because it was an experienced head coach and he had a good resume, but he was at the end of his rope. He was a defensive minded guy. And John Fox kind of went there, couldn't really do what he wanted to do. And then he just, would it be fair to say John Fox, especially towards the end, he kind of just went through the motions?
Oh,
That's what it really felt like.
yeah, it went through the motions and he turned into a get off my lawn guy. Except not as grumpy, but he just like a meh, meh, and it was going through the motions. Heart wasn't in it,
My
and
monkey. I had a monkey that died of heat stroke once.
yeah, it was sad, and I believe was that a Polian pick or a Corsi pick?
That was Ernie Accorsi. Ernie Accorsi essentially made that hire.
Yes, and he hired both. He was like, well, we're gonna hire this young hotshot GM and pair him with an old veteran coach,
Yeah.
and that that marriage didn't go well.
No, and you had two very different I mean, it was such a weird time in Bears history because the Bears were coming off the Phil Emery Trustman era, which set the team back years. So Ryan Pace really had to kind of try to rebuild, but at the same time, he was also tasked with trying to get them in the right direction by winning again. So you were trying to win and rebuild at the same time, and it got really messy. And it wasn't until the end of the Fox era where, you know, even Trubisky aside, it's like, all right, you brought in some guys like Danny Trevathan, Akeem Hicks, and you started to build a bit of a defense. And you're like, okay, you could see something kind of working here. And then you picked a direction on quarterback, and you still had some respectable play on the O line because you had Kyle Long. And then you had Jordan Howard, who those first few years he was really, really good. Things started to finally take shape after that, but for most of that John Fox era, it was what was left of the Cutler era, and just it was a mishmash. So the whole era was very, very weird. And you signed
It
Mike Glennon.
oh, the Mike Glennon.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The Mike Glennon thing was so embarrassing. You had a guy that you just you signed to way too big of a contract and then blindsided him with uh with a different quarterback that he's gonna have to compete with. Just the whole thing was stupid.
Well, and the fact that you gave all that money to Mike Glennon, it just,
It's funny. Like Ryan Pace, in some ways, I think was a good GM. I think I think with those later picks and uh and I think some of the people he picked in free agency were fine. It was just he was so bad with being aggressive trading picks and signing people to big contracts that came back to bite us in the ass. And then you have Ryan Poles, who hasn't been able to hit on a lot of these picks and but is really conservative when it comes to the cap. Like somehow if we could just combine those, but knowing our luck, we would combine them into somebody that couldn't hit on picks and was still aggressive with the cap and put us in really bad position.
well, yeah. And I mean, like, you look at Ryan Pace, and the two big sins, like you said, it was overpaying for guys way too aggressively, like Andy Dalton and Jimmy Graham. And Jimmy Graham was fine, but they rushed so quickly to pay him, trading draft picks like it was just child money, and then obviously not getting the quarterback right. So The rest of the roster, though, it's like, okay, he identified what it took to build a really good defensive line and a good secondary. And I think his talent evaluation, it was flawed in some areas, but in other areas, he found value in good places. Like the Akeem Hicks acquisition ended up being one of the better acquisitions of the past 10 years for this team. So, you give and take what you get there. But, you know, he was forced with John Fox, and then he picked Matt Nagy. And Matt Nagy made sense, but he was not near the level of Ben Johnson, even though he was in the Andy Reid coaching tree.
Yeah, I'm looking at Ryan Pace. Obviously, the Trubisky trade was terrible. That was the trade to get him, and then the wrong guy. In hindsight, everyone's like, oh man, there was three quarterbacks and you picked the bad one. But then, yeah, you waited out a little bit and you're like, okay, maybe two out of the three weren't the ones you wanted.
Well, yeah, I mean, Deshaun Watson is just garbage, and I mean,
As a
we want to,
person and a player.
yeah, and we won't go far down this road, but there were mock drafts putting Trubisky as the most talented guy. Pat Mahomes was not the first overall generational pick that other quarterbacks in the past were. So, that's all hindsight, but you know,
But
Ryan
the
Pace,
trading up for him
yeah, that was
was
stupid.
tough.
That was stupid.
Trading up for Leonard Floyd, um, trading up for Anthony Miller, and then the Adam Shaheen in the second round. Those were some brutal things.
Adam Shaheen, I bit hard on that one. I liked the whole baby Gronk thing. I bought into it, and I'm ashamed. I am. I will admit, because I mean, there were some moves that Ryan Pace made where they didn't work, but you were like, when they were made at the time, you could kind of be like, okay, I can kind of see it. You could see where the logic is. I mean, it was really flawed drafting Kevin White, obviously his first ever draft, but either way, back to what I was going to is you look at the situation where you're at now, and you know where your weaknesses are on this team. And you know that the weaknesses you have on the Bears were the Lions' strengths. What's the biggest weakness on this team, you'd say? It's the trenches. Where's the strongest point on the Lions? It's the trenches. You're going to need to have to redo both sides of the ball, basically. And, the fact of the matter is, Ben Johnson in Chicago doesn't have Penei Sewell on that line. And he doesn't have Jahmyr Gibbs, who is a insanely phenomenal running back. I remember a lot of people shat on the Lions for that pick. They made them look awfully stupid because Jahmyr Gibbs is a monster and he's only going to terrorize people for the next few years. But you're going to have to build that up, and you got to think that he's going to have some power in that room during the draft, right? I mean, when they build this roster, Ben Johnson is going to have his input, right?
Yeah, I wonder if it's actual player or if it's hey, this is what we need. This is what we need to prioritize on. And this is the style of guy we want. Go get that.
Right.
Rather than this guy I don't like, this specific guy. I don't know. But maybe because here's the problem with coaches is you have draft guys, scouts. That's their job. When you're the coach, do you think they're watching? I mean, they're working 100-hour weeks during the season. Like, do you think then they're just cramming and trying to watch all the film of all these players? No, they're getting clips and cliff notes on things. So that's why it's always tough when you have a personnel man that's also the coach, because you can't wear two hats. I mean, look, Bill Belichick, great coach, terrible GM, and that was his downfall.
Right, and I'm not saying to act like a GM, but like if Ben Johnson wants to prioritize positions, that's the kind of feedback they're going to get.
Oh yeah. I
Like
mean,
that's,
you're gonna
he's
say
not going to look at
here's
an individual guy, but he's going to be part of that feedback big time.
yeah, and it when it comes down to players, like hey, we're looking at this offensive lineman in free agency. He's he's 6'6", 380 pounds, and he's a road grader. And you're like, well, you know what? We kind of want to run a lot more pull. Can we get somebody that's smaller, more nimble? Oh, okay, let's focus on that. It's like those types of things. Yeah, coach better have feedback because that's if you're not on the same page, how do you expect the roster to be cohesive and work for whatever system you're putting in place?
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the situation the Bears have, and especially on the offensive line, I mean, where do you feel safe on the line?
Right
You need
tackle.
a center, that's for sure.
Yeah, I feel here's where I rank things as it stands now, not assuming anybody um is re-signed. So, with my assumption is Tevin Jenkins does not have a contract anymore, so I cannot consider him. I feel solid about right tackle. I feel um meh plus on left tackle, and I feel meh minus at left guard because I'm assuming that's going to be Ryan Bates. And I feel about center and right guard.
Yeah, that's fair.
I would I would love to upgrade and get starters at both guard spots and a center and make Ryan Bates your primary backup for all three spots. That that would be the goal.
Yeah, I don't think he's a starting lineman.
Um, but it's funny now that it's Ben Johnson, I've seen so many people start mocking uh Ashton Genty to the Bears with the number 10 pick.
I know, I know. I mean, you do need a better running game. And part of that is improving the offensive line. Don't get me wrong, but boy, you had great running in Detroit because you had a great offensive line and you had very good running backs. And you know what? I'm going to say this too right now quickly. I'm sorry that I rushed off Dave Montgomery the way I did. He's a darn good running back. And I was always a fan of him in Chicago, but I kind of acted like it wasn't as big of a deal to lose him. And maybe, just maybe, we as football fans have gotten a little too straight away from the value of running backs. There was kind of this perception for a while that running backs were just replaceable. And maybe we overestimated that a little bit. Because
I
you know what?
I
There are
will say
different
that.
styles of running backs.
I will say I agree. It was the value. Like I always liked um Montgomery
Hmm.
and I liked him coming out of college. I watched a lot of his film and I was like, oh, this guy is gonna translate. I'm gonna you he was not a stud. He fit a role in Detroit. And Detroit obviously is much better when Jahmyr Gibbs gets more carries, but David Montgomery was that guy that got you those tough yards, goal line guy. Um, and and he could play three downs, but he didn't have that breakaway speed that Jahmyr Gibbs has. So it was the thunder and lightning, and it worked really well. And the Bears decided not to pay. What is he making? Was it 3 year, 18 million? And I was like, oh, it's a lot to pay. So that's where was flawed because I bought into the nobody's going to pay running backs. And suddenly, what, 2 years of that? And then it bounced back, and you saw a bunch of running backs get paid last year.
Look at Saquon Barkley, man. Look at Derrick Henry. Could you imagine if the Bears had those guys?
If you remember, I was a big Derrick Henry guy. I was
Yeah, I do.
I I wanted to pair him so badly with Justin Fields, and my dream scenario is kind of what you're seeing in Baltimore.
Yeah. And maybe I shouldn't have been as uppity on the DeAndre Swift move. And I mean, I said I like DeAndre Swift because I think it's good for Caleb Williams to have a passing running back, a guy who's shifty. And I still think there is value in having a DeAndre Swift, but you'd like to pair him with a strong power type guy that could bowl guys over because you and I both know DeAndre Swift is not one to do that.
Oh yeah, and I think now that you have a smart offensive mind in there, that you're going to utilize him like he's supposed to. Like I is DeAndre Swift, if you get him the ball in space, good things will happen.
Yes.
I mean, I would love to see some play where it's you have the double option on a screen pass, where on one side you have DeAndre Swift and the other side you have DJ Moore, both guys that just really good in different ways in space. And even if the defense recognizes that it's a screen, that they can't cover both sides. And one of those guys is going to be open, and it's up to Caleb to hit the right guy. And you're in their defense, you're in a damned if you're like stuck in a position where you're like, there's no win. And, um, and, you pick up huge chunk plays on that. Like I want to see some creativity like that. And it's going to be so nice to see screen passes where they're executed properly.
hmm And the Bears couldn't do that because you didn't have the right blocking and personnel in place.
Right. And I I hinted at this a couple weeks ago, but I think Kevin Kevin Zeitler is going to find a way to be on the Bears this year. He's the he was the right guard for the last couple of years for the Lions. He's a free agent. He's older. He's he's on, the back nine of his career, but that's one of those guys that he's played under Ben Johnson and he knows what to expect. And he's a very good player and a consummate professional. He comes in here and takes that right guard spot. And he's not going to be here too many years because he's at the end of his career. But um, you put him in there, he plugs that hole, and it allows you to focus in the draft on left guard and center, and you can get maybe even a free agent other move at one of those positions, draft the other one, and you still can draft edge rusher and a running back or whatever else you need.
Yeah, because I think you do need to sign some veteran linemen. I mean, you're going to have to make some free agent moves as well, and you have the cap space to do it. So go ahead and do it. Don't be
Uh,
frugal and don't be conservative with your cap space. The cap space isn't something to flex anymore. You need to start using it to improve your ball club.
yeah, and I'm still a frugal cap guy because if you play that wrong, I mean, you can flirt with going over and maneuvering and kicking some money down the road, but as we're seeing with the Saints, they're they are in cap hell and they just keep kicking the can down the road and they're never going to win until they deal with it and pay the piper. You know what? Cut everybody and we're going to go all minimum players and rookies and just really stink and um, get this cap under control. And in the NFL, it doesn't take that long. They're non-guaranteed contracts. You take 2 years or a year possibly and bite the bullet and get back to it, you know?
Right. And I'm not saying go crazy here, but if you have the chance to add legit talent, you got to do it.
You got to. They've got it's very easy for them to get to $100 million in cap space. That's a lot of
Yes.
cap space.
Yes, it is. So going back to Ben Johnson himself, he's coming into this building, and we saw the whole prank call thing with Caleb Williams, where he thought Ben Johnson was coming here, and he got really excited when he thought that. Then you saw Jaquan Brisker tweet about it today, and everything you hear about Ben Johnson is I don't have a doubt that when these players arrive for camp, that they're going to be ready to play for this guy. No doubt in my mind. You hear a lot of good things about his leadership.
That's the hope. That's the hope.
It would be pretty shocking if he wasn't, but I mean, I guess you never know. But I mean, you read some of the quotes about him and you hear what the experts say, and he's never been a head coach before. Nothing is official until they actually do, but it's not like there's a bunch of people pointing out these flaws and nitpicking. I mean, the most nitpicking I'm seeing is from the playoff game. And yes, the trick play that got picked off was not the time for that. I understand it. And I get that when Goff fumbled 3-1, you should have been running the ball with Gibbs. I get it. But you know what? Ben Johnson had over 500 yards in that game and 31 points. That is usually enough to either win you a game or give you a shot to win you a game late in the NFL. And you know what? Ben Johnson didn't throw an awful pick six. He also didn't throw an awful pick at the end of the first half to take away points that could have been scored. That was all on Jared Goff, not on Ben Johnson. But other than that, you see what people say about him, and about how he is a no nonsense guy. He's going to demand perfection for you, and he's going to go out there and make sure that you get every little detail right. Very detail oriented. And that's what we need.
That's what I want. And from what I hear, he's a perfectionist, and um and that's what they need. Is they need to work through things and perfect them and know what they're doing and be on the same page. And there was so much this year where, wide receivers and quarterbacks were on the same page. Guys stopping routes when the play breaks down. Nobody knew what they were supposed to do, like they didn't run scramble drills. Um, and you look back on the heyday of Aaron Rodgers, and whenever a play broke down and he was chased out of the pocket, it uh he always had a receiver that was on the same page and would use that opportunity to break free, and then you had a wide open guy. And with the Bears, they didn't have open guys. Guys would stop, guys would, nobody knew what they were supposed to do, and like somebody should be coming back to the ball to be a safety valve. Somebody should try to go deep and break that coverage. Like, you've got to have these things in place for when the play breaks down, and they just didn't. They never have. And I'm hoping that's how things go through this off season. And I'm not going to get my hopes up because until I see them prove it, I've spent too many years buying into the hype of the off season only to be disappointed. And much like drafting Caleb Williams, I'm just going I'm I'm not gonna, you know, wear the rose-colored glasses. I'm gonna wait and see how things are different.
Yes, I am with you there. With all the excitement and the hope, there is still the fact of the matter that you have a lot of problems to fix, and the Bears have a history of being the Bears. And I think that one of the best things we can say is we're happy that they didn't do what they normally did, because going into this offseason, we were terrified that they were going to do the wrong thing. And then as the offseason got a few days older, we started already just accepting that they were going to do the wrong thing. We were talking ourselves into Mike McCarthy because we felt like we had to be at the accepted stage of this whole process for a guy that wasn't even hired yet. That we were accepting Mike McCarthy in kind of that stages of grief that happens with people. That's how broken we are. That's how broken we should be. We know that this team has screwed up time and time again. And we know that this isn't a guarantee. Nothing is. I'm just glad that they're doing what they haven't done before. And it's not in a, oh, it's the thinking outside the box creative way. It is the going for the alpha and the number one choice. The one that everyone would want to have. It's just nice to feel that.
So now it's the important decisions of who all the coordinators are going to be.
We already have some names dropping,
Yeah, so Dennis Allen is defensive coordinator.
which I'd be fine with.
Yeah, I mean, he's a very good defensive coordinator.
I believe he's a 4-3, right?
Yes.
And
Um,
I think if we have him, you'll see some more man coverages, which I have been begging for.
um, and he's a very aggressive blitzer. So I'm hoping that we see that in play. Um, and then I'm hearing rumblings that the interest is in Darren Rizzi as special teams coordinator, which would be funny because I believe he was the interim head coach when Dennis Allen got fired.
Yeah, that's correct.
But from what I understand is he still has outstanding interviews for head coaching opportunities. I don't think he's going to seriously get them, but he's not going to accept anything until that's finalized. But um, it seems like that's the interest there. So you would have guys that were not promotions. They have done those jobs and both have head coaching experience.
Yes.
Um, Rizzi was college head coach and has been an interim head coach. Dennis Allen has been an interim head or been a head coach in the NFL. So um, now it'll be who's the offensive coordinator and who's the quarterback's coach.
Yep.
And I wonder, is there consideration of bringing Thomas Brown back in some capacity?
Yeah, I think people were wondering that, and I'm in the camp of if they don't, they don't, but if they do, okay.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Like I'm not, it could be awkward to bring him in. Um, you know, uh, but it could be. I think it warrants a phone call from Ben Johnson saying, "Hey, like, give me the scoop on what I'm walking into and experiences you had, what worked, what didn't. Would you be interested in joining my staff?"
Because, and to your point, he's not getting a head coaching job next year. I don't even know if he's going to get a defensive coordinator or an offensive coordinator job. He might get some interviews, but do you think anyone would hire him as an offensive coordinator after just a few? I mean, offensive coordinators have been hired as never being offensive coordinators before, but I don't know. I think it's possible that he gets an OC job maybe somewhere, but he's not going to get a head coaching job. So maybe if he doesn't get a better offer and he gets a solid offer on the staff of Ben Johnson, maybe he does come back. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to get an offensive coordinator job. And the thing is I feel bad because it's not like he went from offensive coordinator to interim head coach. He went from passing game coordinator to interim offensive coordinator using the same system in place, coaching from the press box to going to the sidelines to be the interim head coach. Like it, that didn't do him any favors in his career.
No, and I think that maybe he could have proven himself as an OC had he stayed an OC. But he wasn't. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see where he goes. I have no ill feelings towards the guy, and if he does come back, I think everybody would have an understanding of the situation. Like, hey, I know I was your interim head coach, but I think everybody realizes that Brown brings value, but he knows he was over his head. They know he was over his head, but there were no like ill feelings towards him.
Yeah, so it's going to be an exciting, next week, couple weeks, and seeing the staff fill out and you know start learning more of his plan and then free agency hitting in what, March?
Yeah, it'll be here before you know it. I mean, we're gonna have the AFC and NFC Championship next week, and then 2 weeks will be the Super Bowl. Well, 3 weeks, I should say. You got your bye week, but it's all gonna happen pretty quickly. And next thing you know, people are gonna be reporting to camp. And what I really look forward to is that opening press conference. I want to hear him talk as the head coach of the Bears. Just it would be such a breath of fresh air after the hits principle and all that bull crap.
Yeah, I don't want any acronyms.
Yeah, this is an acronym free zone now.
March 10th starts the legal tampering period.
I love how they call it legal tampering. There's one other thing I wanted to say really quickly. I want to make this point. There was some nerves about Ben Johnson being schmoozed by Tom Brady and the Raiders. We talked about this, especially with Tom Brady being in the building in Detroit on Saturday, because Tom Brady was doing the color on Fox and Ben Johnson was calling offensive plays for the Lions. And there was a lot of worry, a lot of frustration over that, kind of making it, quote, I don't know if you call it tampering or you call it collusion, whatever, but as nervous as I was about the Bears getting this wrong, and even though I saw that and even said, okay, that does seem kind of bogus, there was never really a chance that just those two being in the building was going to swoo his decision, right? Like
No,
it seemed kind of like a overreaction type thing.
I didn't believe the Raiders were a viable option. I feel bad for Raiders fans because they really, really thought this was happening. They knew in their hearts that Ben Johnson to the Raiders was happening. And I've not gone down and checked their tiers yet, but the cope is probably pretty hard.
Oh yeah, I mean, and listen, if that was us, the coping would be very, very hard, and we'd be tweeting, "Get ready to speak, Mike McCarthy, buddy." But yeah, it's I've seen some things, and yeah, and there was a lot of frustration from Lions fans, and I get it. You know, the guy that has helped you bring you much success is now going to a division rival. But I will say this to the Lions: you're still going to be okay. You got a great team. You get healthier next year. You could still be Super Bowl favorites. And I still think they will be Super Bowl favorites. That whole team isn't going anywhere. And I get it. Every season is precious. Windows can open and close very quickly. But you still have that great offensive line. You have Jameer Gibbs, who is just a monster. He's going to wreak havoc for so long. And you have Amon-Ra St. Brown. You know, you still have David Montgomery. I don't know how this injury is going to impact him long term, but you still do have him. And, you know, you had some players on defense that got hurt, including Aiden Hutchinson. Hopefully he returns okay because you never want to wish injuries on anybody. And that was a horrific injury. Um, I don't know if he's ever going to be quite the same, but he's still going to be very good regardless. And he could fully recover and still be the same monster that he was. But, you know, at the end of the day, there's still going to be a really good team and likely favorites to win the division. So the team's going to be okay despite losing Ben Johnson, I feel. But I get it. It would be frustrating. And I know there are some Lions fans that are saying, well, if he was interviewing with the Bears and he was so focused on that, why wasn't he focused on winning the game on Saturday? And on one point, I can understand it. But like I said, I really don't think Ben Johnson just lost that game. They couldn't stop the Commanders to save their life. And Jared Goff threw some brutal interceptions.
Scoring over 30 points at home with the defense they're supposed to have, it that should have been a win.
Hmm. Yes.
So I can't blame him. It's not like the last game Nagy coached with the Chiefs before he came to the Bears. Um, like that was a dud. Like this was not a dud. Jared Goff had a bad game, but they scored a lot of points. They moved the ball. They
Right.
just there was just no stopping the Commanders' offense.
Right.
And
Exactly.
and he has no like there's nothing he can do there. That's not his job.
He didn't draw the pick six play late in the second quarter.
Right.
He didn't throw the pick in the end zone at the end of the first half. You know? So, yes, you can look at that trick play. That was not the two of the trick plays worked and they were great, but that third trick play, that was not the time for it. That was a problem, but as a whole, you can't just blame Ben Johnson for that loss.
No. So I don't know. I'm excited. I'm gonna be cautiously optimistic though, because until I see it all in the works in regular season, uh it's it's all just a pipe dream. I'm gonna try to not be meatball about this.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Believe me, we have been so bamboozled on so many occasions. We have been promised this is the year where everything goes right and it doesn't. And even when it seems like things can't go wrong, they do. And you do wonder, we've given the Bears credit for getting this hire right. But on the flip side, I'm going to ask this. Was Ben Johnson bear proof? Was their process, how right was their process? Or was he just such an obvious candidate the Bears couldn't refuse? Like the trade with Carolina was such a bargain they couldn't refuse. I don't know.
I
It
don't know if
doesn't
we'll,
really matter if they get it right, but I just wonder.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
I don't either. And here's another question I want you to riddle me. I tweeted this out maybe an hour before we started recording. Go back to the 2024 season. Say Tyreek Stevenson bats that ball away. Say Cairo Santos's kick goes above the Packer defender and goes through. And say they don't mismanage the clock at the end of the game on Thanksgiving. Just those 3 games right there. So what that would give you? 8 wins? You go 8-9 with the rookie quarterback? Are you making the hire for Ben Johnson? Or are you running it back again with Eberflus? I would think, knowing this team, they'd be running it back with Eberflus because Eberflus was under contract for multiple years. They doubled down on him once. They got basically to 500 in that scenario. And you could say, oh, well, rookie quarterback around 500 didn't miss by much. It feels like it could have very well been tripling down on Matt Eberflus again. So, was it worth those painful losses? Only time will tell. But if Ben Johnson's in here and he's this amazing coach and it takes the Bears back to the playoffs and back to relevancy, maybe it is. Just a thought. What's your take on that?
I want to think you're right that had this been rookie quarterback, we got near 500, improve that offensive line, and suddenly it's a different story next year. I'm hoping the best, one of the unintended things hiring Ben Johnson does is makes George stay in his lane, makes Kevin stay in his lane.
Yes. Yes. Because I want the alpha to Hallis Hall to be Ben Johnson. Kevin Warren, go build your stadium wherever the hell you're building that stadium. George McCaskey, sit in your office, draw with your purple crayon, and lick your lollipop and drink your juice box. Stay away. Let Ben Johnson set the tone, create the culture within Hallis Hall. Let him be the alpha in the building. That's what you're hiring him to do.
Yeah.
You're making him the highest paid coach in Bears history for a reason.
Well, here's to the press conference and here's to the off season, and fingers crossed that this works out like we all hope.
Yep, it's going to be a challenge because you're still the 4th best team in the division. You still got a lot of holes. The Lions are still an excellent team. The Packers are still going to be a good team. And the Vikings are still going to be a good team with Kevin O'Connell. Even if you go to a rookie quarterback, I have no doubt they'll still be competitive. So it's going to be tough. It's going to be challenging. But if you're going to be great, you got to compete with the best.
Yep. So I think that's going to do it for this episode of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago Emergency Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Please hit subscribe however you listen to podcasts, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, Spotify, etc. Share this podcast with your friends. How we grow the show. Follow us on social media at Swerski Sports, Facebook.com/Swerski Sports, SwerskiSports.com, or ShyFanPat2 for Alex on Twitter/X, or AlexanderJPatCreative.com for all the cool stuff that Alex does. And again, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, bear down.
Cubs win! What a lucky break! The good Lord wants the Cubs to win!
We thank Ditka and God for all they have provided.
Cubs win! Cubs win! Cubs win!
Oh, I don't want her. You can have her. She's a Packer fan. She can't fit in my van.
And she looks like number New Yorkers. Smoking crack is not legal on planes.
Bears 31 to -7.
The Bears.
Oh, when the Bears go bearing down.